I'd like to welcome everybody very warmly to our post-summer first Wales Green Infrastructure Forum webinar. And today we're really lucky to have Paul Nolan with us. Paul is the director of the Mersey Forest. And Paul's been a real friend of the Wales Green Infrastructure Forum. In fact, he was at the very first meeting that we ever held back in Cardiff, when we held the meeting in the Welsh Civic Centre before we moved to the Bute Park Education Centre. And Paul did a great presentation on the Green Infrastructure Valuation Toolkit, which he and his colleagues had pioneered. And we've collaborated really closely ever since. Many of you will remember Claire Olver coming to speak to us about the Natural Health Initiative. And those of you that work in North Wales and some who travelled up from South Wales will have been to the joint Northwest Green Infrastructure Partnership and Wales Green Infrastructure Forum meetings, which Paul and his team usually hosted. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Paul Nolan to talk about this amazing new initiative, the Great North Forest, and keep a lookout for what the opportunities might be for us here in Wales. Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Pete. Is that screen sharing okay?
I can see it perfectly. I hope everybody else can. If anybody can't see it, please use the chat and let me know, and I'll see if there's any troubleshooting I can do. So I'm going to mute myself now, Paul, and over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thanks, Pete, for inviting me along today to talk about Northern Forest and what we've been up to. And as you suggest, toward the end, maybe a bit of discussion about how we've got the opportunity to look across the border at what we can do beyond England's boundary. So Northern Forest, what I'm going to cover is a bit of background to why the Northern Forest came into being, how we developed the evidence base and use that to secure some resources to enable us to get on with achieving the Northern Forest planting, and look at some intervention and evidence examples, including the Natural Health Service, which some of you will already have heard about, the aspirations for the forest, progress today, and then obviously the what next questions as well. So the background to the Northern Forest was probably 5 years ago now, and certainly in England, the government starting to think about an environment strategy, and that was sort of on and off the agenda for a while. But we wanted to work with our colleagues in other community forests across the M62 corridor, so from Mersey Forest over in the west through to City of Trees around Manchester, White Rose Forest covering Yorkshire, and then Haywood Forest over at Holland and East Riding, and with the Woodland Trust, to see whether we could put a big idea to government for to deliver one of the key strands of the Committee on Climate Change's work, and also going back even further, the UK Ecosystem Services assessment, looking at accelerating greatly the amount of planting in and around our towns and cities. So that was the background. Woodland Trust supported or provided the funding for us to go away and do lots of the evidence gathering and the research to actually pull together a plan, and we're taking this work forward collectively across Woodland Trust and the community forests in a joint collaborative effort across the geography, which I'll show you in a bit. So this is the plan we started to pull together. So the green areas shows the community forest boundaries. The Mersey Forest boundary has changed a little bit, so we now do cover the Wirral and Cheshire East. So there's slightly more of that geography covered by community forests. But we can see as a halo that's drawn around the community forests that stretches into North Wales. And we were always of the opinion that this initiative, whilst it was focused mainly on English policy, there is lots that we could do across the border, and maybe I'll touch on that a bit later. But that basically is the geography that we're talking about. To date, we've certainly focused on this side of the border, as you can imagine. And the new Northern Forest, the headlines were 25 years to deliver 50 million trees, and I've just mentioned the collaborative working, using the M62 or the Transpennine Trail as the spine for this work, and basically building on the work that the community forests have been doing for the past 30 years and our collaborative work with Woodland Trust throughout that period. So the rationale was based on the idea that we've only got 7.6 tree cover. We have a population of 13 million people. That's expected to rise by nearly 10% over the next 20 years. Around about 650,000 new homes going to be built. That was all in planning and in investment planning for housing development. And through various initiatives, there was about £75 billion worth of capital investment in transport over the next 25 years too. So with all of that growth, both in terms of development and population, there was no real green infrastructure or natural environment plan to complement the scale of those changes. And so we thought that having a community forest based plan, working with Woodland Trust to complement this, might be a good way for us to try to ensure sustainable development, but certainly to set the scene for good quality place for those businesses, for those houses, for those people who either live in the area or might come and live in the area. And while we were doing that, we wanted to do all those sorts of things that GI planning allows us to do. So again, you'll be hugely familiar with all of this. So we weren't just planting trees for the sake of it. We were looking to deliver all these sorts of benefits. So whether it was biodiversity or reducing flood risk, I'm not going to go through all of these, but our plan is based on delivering a huge array of benefits to local communities from 50 million trees over the next 25 years. So these are the sorts of issues. I've touched on some of those. We wanted to make sure that it was all evidence-based, and I'll come on to that in a moment. And we wanted to identify where we could have most impact. And we wanted to use the GI valuation toolkit, which again, Peter's mentioned, to try to value that impact. So I'm going to show you lots of maps now, but I'm going to skip through them quite quickly. But we did lots of mapping to understand the place. Lots of this work had already been done to develop the community forest plans, but we refreshed and revisited the work to try to make sure that we had consistency across this geography. Obviously, part of this geography is outside of the community forest as well, so we had some new areas to look at. So we looked at land classification, we looked at existing woodland cover, say 7.6% today, but significant areas of ancient woodland within our boundaries as well. So we didn't want to just look at planting trees, but making sure we were managing the existing resource, and in particular, those extremely valuable ancient woodland areas as well. The community forests are certainly focused on planting woodlands in and around our towns and cities, so we wanted to look at the tree cover in urban areas based on the work that Kieran Doig had carried out in 2017. So we looked at percentage tree cover in all of our cities. We also, because we were looking at where we could have impact, we wanted to see where the issues were most prevalent across the geography. So we looked at mental health, and a colleague of mine in Mersey Forest team created this index of the risk of poor mental health across the geography. So again, not surprising where it is, but it just verifies that our city centres, our major conurbations are the places where the highest risk of poor mental health is. So what can we do through Northern Forest to try to alleviate that? We looked at childhood obesity and adult obesity. So I find these two maps really interesting. You may not, but I'll flick between them. So this is the geography of childhood obesity. And if you focus on where the red areas are for high incidence of childhood obesity, and then where the red areas are for adult obesity, I don't really understand why they're so different. And nobody has been yet able to tell me either. But anybody on the call who knows, that'll be great. But I think it's just interesting that they're not the same places, and therefore we need to have different interventions to deal with those two different issues that we want to address. So there's the two maps side by side. You see that the east has got way more adult obesity. The west appears to have more childhood obesity for some reason. And so Pete mentioned the Natural Health Service. So what we were saying was, in terms of the evidence base, we know there are ways that we can use trees and woodlands, community forestry, to help improve health and well-being through things like Natural Health Service. So we can tackle poor mental health. We can help to tackle childhood and adult obesity by putting in place interventions like Natural Health Service that uses our trees and woodlands as a health asset to get people happy and healthy. And we've got loads of evidence to show that if we do that, we can have a positive impact on people's well-being and on their physical activity. And we know that we can target those interventions on the places that need them the most. So the map on the left-hand side shows the monitoring of the people who take part in Natural Health Service activity in Mersey Forest. As you can see, we've targeted the red areas on the map, which are the areas of greatest health deprivation. So there are very, very few people that we're attracting or dealing with, if you like, in the greener areas of Mersey Forest. And this was almost like the template for how we would want to go forward, to reflect back on those obesity maps or the risk of poor mental health. We would want to in the future show the same sort of targeting at those red areas on those maps as we're able to show on here. And ideally, the right-hand side, that improvement in well-being and physical activity, being able to monitor and show the impact of what we're doing across that geography in those target areas as well. So in this instance, what we were saying was, we know where we want to do things, we have the tools to do it, and we know we can achieve good results. So that we built that into our plan. The other thing we looked at was the evidence of where we could have an impact on reducing flood risk. So we mapped the areas of upstream of communities at risk, and based on the Forestry Commission research, we focused on the catchments of greater than 100 hectares, where research indicates that we could have greatest impact. So again, we were looking at those communities where planting woodlands upstream would have an impact. And we found that 191,000 homes were at risk, and we could make a difference. That was reducing risk for over 400,000 people, and potentially, and this is not detailed economics on the risk of flood reducing, but if we reduce by 1%, that is an annual saving of about 60 million. If it's a 5% reduction, that's 300 million. So starting to think about how we justify investment in trees and woodlands by looking at the cost saving for society from, just in this case, flood risk reduction. And again, we've got evidence to show how we can actually do this. So this is some work that's been taking place in City of Trees, looking at slowing the flow by using leaky dams. So working with the Environment Agency and others, we now have really good data to show how incorporating natural flood management into new woodland planting can actually help to reduce flood risk downstream. So moving on, some other data, we're looking at heat stress in towns and cities. So again, how do we get deep urban planting, and where should we do that? Where can we set the scene for growth? So where is the housing going to be most concentrated, and how do we provide high quality settings for that? And we also used a program called Condartis to look at where we could intervene best to support northward movement of woodland species. So as the climate envelope changes for those species, where are the barriers to the northward migration going to be, and where ought we to put more woodland to join up the landscape? So the Lawton idea of better connected landscapes to allow that species movement. So we then took all of that data. We also looked at landscape assessment, and we wanted to see whether we could fit all of these trees, 50 million trees, into the landscape. So we went through basically every single landscape character area, assessed the statements of environmental opportunity, assessed the percentage increase that could be accommodated, and then found, basically through crunching all the numbers for each of those landscape character areas, that the landscape could cope with over 350 million more trees. So 50 million was a start. Some people were saying, are we being ambitious enough with a target of 50 million? We kind of pushed back and said, well, let's get the 50 million done and then worry about kind of upping to 350. But what we were comforted by was we weren't going to be damaging the landscape in any way. This was actually a positive contribution to the landscape character across Northern Forest. So we then brought all of that together. So we've identified what the issues are, where they're prevalent, and we've got the evidence base to indicate that what we're doing can make a difference. We've shown there's capacity in the landscape. And then we looked at two scenarios, one of which, again, harks back to the ecosystem assessment in the early 2000s, and a scenario that they used called nature at work. And that was, where would we have greatest impact on the range of GI benefits that we all know about? And then the second one was, supposing the government just wanted to dash for carbon, what would that look like? So this is scenario one. So this is mashing together lots of those different data layers. And the darker green areas shows where we ought to be targeting our resources and planting more trees if we want this nature at work type scenario. So nature at work looks at improving health, reducing flood risk, improving air quality, all those sorts of things. So unsurprisingly, that's in and around our towns and cities. So Again, we're reassured that kind of mirrors what the Committee on Climate Change is saying. It mirrors what the ecosystem assessment said as well. Dash for carbon looks completely different. So as you can imagine, if the government just says we just need to lock up loads of carbon really quickly, you then head up to the more contentious areas, if you like, for planting. So it is the uplands. It's basically rewinding the forestry agenda 30, 50, 70 years and saying we go for cheap land away from people in order to lock up as much carbon as possible as quickly as possible. So the scenario we're going with at the moment is this one and not that one, but we're interested in this just as a discussion point, really. We do need to dash for carbon, but that could be a controversial strategy for delivering carbon sequestration if we were to follow that map. Okay. We tried to value all of this as well. So looking at that nature at work scenario, we valued it. We looked at using the Green Infrastructure Valuation Toolkit, and we assessed if for every pound investment, the likely benefits that would be achieved. So from the GI Valuation Toolkit, there was a 5-to-1 benefit to cost ratio based on the toolkit, and you can see on the right hand side the table showing the types of benefits, so the climate change adaptation and mitigation, etc., etc. So this isn't a full cost benefit analysis, but it gives us a good indication of the scale and the types of benefits that will be delivered. It probably is an underestimate rather than an overestimate of the benefit, but we'd rather be a little bit conservative and argue our case in the future for greater benefit. Okay, and then in terms of the progress to date, we've planted 3 million trees over the past few years. We're really fortunate, and we've worked hard with DEFRA to secure about £50 million, apologies for my typo, by 2025 to help to deliver this. My pound sign also broke last night, so that's why I haven't got the pound sign in front of the 50. So we do have all the resource available to deliver this. We're working with the Woodland Trust and other colleagues to accelerate delivery. We're accelerating 5 to 6 times on the baseline level of planting, and that obviously takes a bit of time to ramp up. But we're also looking for additional resources to do more things, so more jobs, engage more people, etc. So in the places where we've made less progress, so we planted 3 million trees. I think the whole area of timber, woodland management and new products is an area we want to focus on in the next few years. We need to link better to planning. So the idea of us having a complementary plan to the £75 billion worth of infrastructure projects hasn't really been taken forward effectively. We're still working in a quite piecemeal way with infrastructure developers. So there is definitely some work to do strategically to try to align Northern Forest with HS2 and some of the other major infrastructure projects. I'm not sure what the case is in Wales, but we are certainly feeling some stress on the contractor base at the moment. So in accelerating the amount of work we're doing, we are starting to find that that the contractors aren't there, and therefore we're starting to see some delays in getting work on the ground. And as yet, we haven't kind of tipped the balance in terms of making sure that we've got land availability, upping the site size, and we definitely do need to get more skills, knowledge and innovation into our sector, all things that we're trying to work on. So the sorts of things we want more of are forestry jobs, skills and training. I was really fortunate to be trained in Wales. I went to uni at Bangor. So we want more of those Bangor graduates coming into our sector, into community forestry with the right skills, the right training to take on this work. But we also need degree apprenticeships. We also need people coming in as a craftsperson level as well, and greater levels of understanding about what community forests are. So that idea of the scenario of nature at work being what we're trying to do, not necessarily just banging trees into the ground. We're also trying to focus on where we get higher tech forestry. So what's the opportunity for greater use of drone technology, for autonomous vehicles, for machine planting, all that sort of stuff, and how do we attract new investment and new business people into our sector. And again, in Wales it might be the same, but the carbon market at the moment is really driving a lot of interest in what we're doing, and probably a lot of innovation in what we will do in the future. Is how we, I suppose the question is, do we manage that, or do we just let that grow organically? We are carrying out quite a bit of research. We want to use the Northern Forest and the community forest as a living laboratory. And this idea of joined upness. So we're really, certainly from the community forest perspective, and maybe Mersey Forest as your nearest neighbour, what does it look like to have a forest that goes from Hull to Anglesey? Is that something that's even possibly contemplated? How might we start those conversations about working collaboratively with those in North Wales who've got green infrastructure plans, or aspirations for more trees and woodlands, or those climate emergency action plan delivery people who want to see some carbon sequestration and climate change adaptation work, which might involve trees and woodlands. Is there something we can do collaboratively across the border to try to work more effectively, share ideas on events like this? That's a really quick run through, and apologies for rattling through lots of the slides, but really happy to take any questions. And thanks again, Pete, for inviting me.
Paul, that was brilliant as ever. Many, many thanks indeed. I've certainly got a few questions for you, but I wonder if you could turn on, if you haven't already, if you could turn on the chat, and you'll see that there's already a whole bunch of them there. So would you mind returning the host to me, and then taking the questions from the top? Now,
I'm just trying to find the way to return the thing to you.
There's probably 3 little dots. If you hover your mouse over my image, there's 3 little dots. It'll probably come up in that menu. Before this happens, regular visitors to these webinars will know that Zoom often cuts us off before our allotted time. So if that does happen, what we can normally do is just, if everybody clicks back on the join the meeting link, then that normally restarts the meeting and we can carry on with questions up until 11 o'clock. So I'm going to shut up again and turn it back over to Paul. If you wouldn't mind starting with Olwen's question.
So why was Lancashire not included in the area? So it is included in that halo geography around the community forest areas. So Lancashire definitely is in Northern Forest, and things are happening in Lancashire. Woodland Trust take the lead in Lancashire because there isn't at the moment a community forest in that area. So the simple question is, Lancashire are in, there just happen not to be a community forest, but the resources are available, or the resources are available to them to deliver more trees and woodland, and there's work underway to try to make that happen. Other priority habitats, definitely that was all included in our mapping. So we looked at excluding other priority habitats when we were looking at where we ought to plant trees. So in a similar way to the assessment of landscape, we looked at where are the places where you definitely ought not to plant. So I'm not sure whether you can come back to me on that one if you want to. Try and say we have taken that into account as best we can. And then obviously as we go into operations on a site-by-site level, sites are sifted through UKFS type assessment, whether that's through EIA or just on the smaller schemes through consultation with interested bodies locally. National Forest for Wales. This could link into the National Forest for Wales. What's the management of the area? Okay, so this Northern Forest is all done on a voluntary basis. So we are not acquiring much land, a little bit of land, but most of it is incentives to landowners to change the land management of their land and to carry on managing it in that way for forever. So I'm not sure whether, again, you can come back to me on that if it doesn't answer your question, but it's basically just trying to bring together lots of different landowners and change land use. I'm reading these again. You said the planting species, what's your criteria for species selection? So on the whole, in the community forest, species are still local native planting. So we aren't really in that dash for carbon scenario, and we can discuss that forever. So we're not going for high yield class conifer. We're not going for high yield class conifer, full stop. We're not being told to do that. I think we would probably have to go and remap and reconsult and all sorts of things if we were to basically to change the landscape of Mersey Forest to I don't know, to a Delamere across the whole of the Mersey Forest. So at the moment, yeah, it's use of local native species with a view to making sure that we do have some resilience in there, and looking ahead of what the climate might do in the future, and using the research from people like Forest Commission to just basically check that what we're planting is still going to be suitable in 20, 50, 100 years time, as best we can predict or project. Yeah, the metrics for physical and mental health. So for physical health, we use the IPAC measuring standard. For mental health, we use WEMWEBs. So they're both quite simple, but they are recognised by the health sector, certainly in England. So they've been quite happy to support us using those. And again, we can dive into this a bit more. The monitoring of health is always a bit challenging, because obviously people turn up to do the Natural Health Service activity in order to have an enjoyable time, not to fill in 14 pages of forms. So we have to balance that, actually getting people healthy and getting them in the outdoors and getting people active versus trying to monitor how their health is changing. Applied GI economic toolkit, not a full cost analysis, cost benefit analysis. I'm not sure if that's a question or a statement. So the GI toolkit is it's very high level. It's definitely not a full cost benefit analysis. Full cost benefit analysis for these schemes might cost 20, 30, 100 grand for bigger ones. To apply the GI toolkit might cost £300. So it's a first sift at a high level of what sort of economic benefit we might gain. So we're not suggesting you would use it in a full economic analysis. That's interesting. We haven't had to, so we've convinced government using the data we have, so the evidence we have, that this is a good investment. And they, as you can see, they're investing around about £50 million into Northern Forest through either the Northern Forest work with Woodland Trust, or a programme that's run across all of the community forests called Trees for Climate. So there's a significant amount of money being invested. We are monitoring the impact of what we're doing on using natural capital mapping, GI mapping, and assessment. But again, happy to answer more questions on that if you have any. So that's a really important one. How do we link forest creation with other GI typologies? So all of the community forest planting tend to be a real mix of typologies. So the planting percentage for the past few years, and tree cover, I would think is probably 60% tree cover, with then the other 40% being other habitats within the red line of the site. And then there is definitely assessment of where we need to create corridors and buffers around other habitat on sites that we are planting. So we are trying to think in a GI way and at a landscape scale way. These aren't just woodlands being plonked in the middle of a landscape with no understanding of how they fit into the green infrastructure. They are another part of the green infrastructure, and therefore, those of you who know how we've kind of thought about GI, it is a systems approach. How is what we're doing helping to improve how the system works? Comment on the question. Just reading that. That's a long one. So we're not linked with Julie Froud, but we're always open to collaboration.
I mean, just to come in on that, another organisation I work with, have been quite involved in supporting running of this Foundational Economy Challenge Fund for Welsh Government, which included quite a lot of funding of projects which are looking to do similar things to you, not actually the creation of forests, but linking in with the skills agenda. And Manchester, I think it must have been the mayoral authority, sent a load of people down to talk to us about how it was working and how it's functioning. So they're seeking, I think, to do a similar thing. I haven't heard from them in a while, but if they were doing a similar thing, it would be making monies available specifically for the development of skills and projects like you're talking about. So for example, the Wood Knowledge Wales one, if you don't know of their work, I'd check them out as well. They're developing a forest school in Treherbert. So they're using a lot of community forestry to plant more woods, but they're really trying to develop the skills needed for timber framed housing and so on. So it sounds So there's going to be some more money around, but because you're doing such a big project, if that foundational economy challenge fund or whatever they decide to call it in Manchester is occurring, it might be worth you getting in there earlier and trying to shape it, because it's part of the work. So
definitely. And I think that whole agenda is so important. I tried to flag up that I think there will be. I suppose the economy generally is facing some skill shortages, but we are definitely going to be facing some issues in the next few years around skills and the lack of people going into this sector, into forestry. Even at Bangor Uni, I think the number of students going through the course has reduced, and maybe the focus has changed a little. So somehow we've got to encourage people that this is a good career to get into, GI in general, not just trees and woodlands, and find ways to create the pathways for individuals. So I think we're always open to finding out good ways to collaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested, I might email with you. So, but thanks.
No, that'd be good. Yeah, for sure.
Just before we go on to the rest of the questions, according to Zoom, we've got about 5 minutes left. It looks like we might be able to cover all of the questions in the 5 minutes. If we don't, use the link to the original link to the meeting and come back. But it would be amazing if we could get these questions answered in our allotted time. So back to you, Paul.
I think there's only 2 left. So the first one, we used Condatis for the climate envelope stroke barriers work. That's available online. It's produced by the University of Liverpool. But if you can't find it online, just drop me an email and I'll send you the link and send you the contact details for the people who created it. So that's from Olwen, that's a really good question. Sort of. So as part of the landscape character assessment, did you look at land which was historically woodland? We did in places, so certainly within Yorkshire, where those sorts of opportunities are greatest. And then White Rose Forest in particular has done a piece of work to come up with a protocol for clough woodland. So that kind of took it down to another level. I think we're done. That's all the questions, Pete.
Well, Paul, that was absolutely amazing. That was a real tour de force. And all I can say is thank you so much for taking the time.
Can I ask a question?
Especially as I didn't send you the reminders. So for those of you listening to this, Paul was up until God knows what hour last night finishing off his presentation. So we really do owe you, Paul. And please keep in touch with us, and we will do whatever we can to hopefully collaborate and extend that great northern forest as far as we can extend it.
So Pete, thanks for that. And I suppose my question to the group is it worth looking at something that is cross-border? So there's been a few kind of hints in the questions above that obviously there might be things that could join at the border, but I just wonder, economically, there's the Mersey Alliance, which brings together North Walian and Northwest England local authorities across the border. I don't think they really have a green plan. They obviously the green infrastructure plan going back to 2011, which you sent me a reminder of. But is there something? I know we're all really busy, but is there something that we could spend a little bit of time potentially over the next year or so trying to develop across the border? It just seems so logical, but I know we're in different legislatures and all sorts of barriers to us working together. But just a thought.
I'm listening out and I'm looking at the screen and nobody's raised their hand. But as I think I said on an email to you, there's a number of the local authorities in North Wales are looking to revise their local development plan. I'm certainly extraordinarily keen on getting more trees planted in towns and cities, ready for when climate change really bites 2080, to shade those southerly facades of buildings. And also the idea of clough woodlands, the idea of having trees planted in in the riparian strips along watercourses. So I think there's a massive amount of opportunity there. And I think you, me, and the forum should maybe start exchanging some emails on this to see, see where we can take it.
Yeah, so I think I've already flagged this up with the people who deal with the Mersey D Alliance within Cheshire West. So maybe that's the forum within which to start the conversation, to have some sort of, whether it's a Northern Forest or some other hook to hang it on.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple of people just said, they'd be maybe willing to have some conversations. Yeah, so we'll look to take it forward if there's interest.
That is absolutely fantastic. Well, before we get cut off at the knees by Zoom, I'm going to formally close the session now with a massive thanks to you, Paul. And this one, I hope, will run and run. So thanks everybody for joining us after the summer. Thank you again, Paul. And I hope to see you at the next meeting when we've got Chantal Van Ham from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. So bye for now, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
See you soon.
Bye.